I know this is probably one of the strangest titles of any book review I've ever done, but if you stick with me till the end, I promise you it will make sense. But before we get into my thoughts of We Used to Live Here by Marcus Kliewer, what is the hook? What is this book about? When a married couple, Eve and Charlie, purchase a fixer-upper in the Pacific Northwest, a strange family knocks on the door claiming they used to live there. After Eve reluctantly lets them in, a series of eerie events are set into motion that strain her psyche and usher in a reality she could have never imagined. We cannot talk about this book without talking about this book. The Great House of Leaves by Mark Danielewski. It is one of my favorite books of all time. Definitely in the top 5. A fantastic horror novel. At least a once-in-a-generation book. And you can tell that We Used to Live Here was heavily inspired by this book, with its puzzle-like nature, it involving a mystery surrounding a house, even exemplified by a collage-style illustration inside the book cover. However, We Used to Live Here is a very poor homage, whereas House of Leaves feels like you are an active participant in the story. You are someone who discovered this ream of manuscripts, cobbled together, and are trying to solve its puzzles. It's a multi-layered, masterful story that this book doesn't come close to. However, I don't think it was trying to be House of Leaves, but it used enough of its elements to where it felt like a very phoned-in version. So it's unfortunate that my view of this book, We Used to Live Here, is marred by this overt homage, because always at the back of my mind, it was difficult for me to separate the masterful work that House of Leaves is from We Used to Live Here. Whereas the puzzles and the clues of House of Leaves are tightly integrated with the narrative itself. They feel like they're symbiotic, they are interwoven, they are an integral part of understanding and experiencing the story. We Used to Live Here shoehorns in documents between chapters that feel segmented and completely separate from the narrative itself, as well as putting in decoder ring style Morse code at the end of each one of these documents. And I'll be honest, after about 2 or 3 chapters of it, I was bored and didn't decode anything else. So now that that's out of the way, hopefully you understand at least part of my review title. And as we move into characterization, the other part will become clear. Our protagonist, Eve, she is a people pleaser. She's been in therapy. She even has a inner monkey spirit, so to speak. A voice from her childhood manifesting in a toy that is kind of a commentator on the events of the book as they unfold. So really, you can see that Kliewer was trying to construct a convincing character in Eve, but it really feels like he's ticking the boxes of a character design manual. Because while he has elements like flaws, like trauma, like weird quirks, it never coalesces to anything that you truly feel, that takes you through the narrative. If you're like someone like me, which brings us to the second part of the title of this review, my wife read this book. She really enjoyed this book. She was excited for me to read it. She thought I would like it. We tend to agree 99% of the time on storytelling, on film, on TV, on books. And so I was surprised to find out that I did not care for this book whatsoever, and she really enjoyed it. And this all comes down to characterization, or I should say, effective characterization to certain individuals. Those individuals being the ladies out there. Now, I'm not saying that you have to be a woman to enjoy this book. However, if you search for We Used to Live Here reviews on YouTube, the vast majority of those reviews, those positive reviews, are from women. I think I found 1 other review, maybe 2, from men who enjoyed the book. And also, this book was a buddy read on my Discord server, and I read it along with a number of other women. And I wasn't really thinking about this whatsoever while I was reading it. It wasn't until my wife told me she could identify with Eve. She understands her people-pleasing nature. She understands the fright and the dread of answering a door knock. She always gets mad at me when someone knocks on the door and I just go to it and open it without checking the camera, whereas she likes to check the camera on her phone beforehand because she explained to me, as a woman, you're always constantly walking around in fear, or the fear of the possibility that something could happen to you. And I can't really identify with that unless maybe I'm walking around a really rough neighborhood. And so I think that's why I didn't connect with Eve, our protagonist. And this was such a great example of how sometimes characterization works for certain people and not other people because of their life experiences, which means that Kliewer gave these women, including my wife that I read this book along with, enough to cling to. I asked them after the fact, all of the other women, if they could identify with Eve, if they understood what that feeling was like, and they all said yes. And I found this absolutely fascinating. However, I'm one that believes that characterization should transcend everything: gender, life experience, race, and everything in between. And granted, that's a hard thing to do, and ironically enough, this book was written by a man, so clearly he did something right if he wrote a female character and other females are identifying with her. But it just didn't work for me whatsoever. And this was honestly the beginning of the end for me regarding this book, because it does not end with character and it continues with plot. Horror to me is about the space between. It's about moments separated by time. Time to let your mind wander. Time to let your mind concoct even more frightening horrors than you could see with your eyes. What made that sound? What made that shadow? Because we all know the strongest kind of fear is fear of the unknown. And speaking of pacing and space to breathe, I have to bring up a film that I thought was a fantastic representation of this kind of execution, and that is the film Strangers. And there's some interesting parallels to this book, especially when the first knock comes to the door. In the film, we have a newly married couple. They're at a remote house. It's in the middle of the night. It's like 2 or 3 in the morning, and they get a knock at the door. They're wondering who it could be at this hour. They answer the door, and the cinematographer made the genius decision to cast the woman's face in shadow. We can see that the actor and the actress can see the woman, but we can't as the viewer. So it's wreathed in mystery. Does she let them in? No, of course she doesn't. But that's exactly what Eve does in this case. When these people come to the house that she just bought and ask to come in, stating they used to live here, we don't get that space, that time to breathe, the time for the horror to manifest in our minds. She lets them in. In The Strangers, she doesn't. Now, granted, it's very different circumstances, but you can see how the concept of the strange person coming to the door, not being let in, giving time for the horror to slowly rise in the head of the protagonist, and thereby in the minds of the viewers. While I love the opening of this book where a strange family knocks the door and the protagonist is conflicted whether or not to let the family in or not because they seem nice enough, they said they just want to look around the house, I felt like turning them away, at least for a chapter, would have been a better decision, because then it would have given us the time to have our minds wander, because that, again, is what horror is to me, the most effective kind of horror. But instead, she lets the family in. They have a conversation. They find weird symbols around the house. The daughter gets lost in the basement. The dad is standing there in a creepy pose while they're looking for her, which brings me to my next problem with this book and the pacing is that it's just one thing after the next, after the next, after the next. That being strange events, horrific events, if you will. I had weird fatigue after reading this book because my mind was never left to wander. And the pacing is relentless. I know a lot of people enjoy that about horror books. They want to see stuff happening. But imagine an action movie where every scene is a fight. Every single scene. There's no downtime. It would eventually get boring, even for an action film, because great storytellers know it's about proportion, and this book is lacking proportion. I'll also say that the plot feels more like a video game than a novel. In fact, I think it would make a great video game because there's a small footprint and a lot of strange people and strange places to interact with. Numerous times I recalled playing a game called Outlast, which I highly recommend, hiding in lockers from crazy people who are stalking you in a mental institution. In fact, there is a scene in here where something very close to that is happening. I know this story had its origins on Reddit, and it very much feels that way. It feels like a series of vignettes that are linked, that are put back to back with no regard for pacing in the novel medium. Which brings us to the writing itself, or as I like to call it, the cinematography of the novel. It's average at best. It's serviceable. I guess it does what it needs to do, but it doesn't evoke horror. It doesn't drag you along, teasing out atmosphere, teasing out dread, painting a horrific picture. There was also another technique used in this book that was criminally overused. I can't believe an editor didn't come in and tame this beast, but it's fragmented writing or staccato writing for effect. Now, I don't think this is inherently bad, only when it's overused, and it is overused here in spades. What do I mean by that? There's a couple of instances in the book where he breaks apart a sentence to try to make it creepier, I guess. I'll find the excerpt and put it up here. And also when our protagonist is checking doors, she turned the first knob, locked. period. She checked the other door, locked, period. So those aren't inherently bad. It's just the overuse in this novel made them stand out to me and honestly become an eyesore. Now, I know a lot of you out there probably don't care for that kind of thing. I'm very picky with prose. Not that it has to be beautiful, not that it has to be amazing, but it just needs to serve its purpose in an effective way. And this prose just is not it. There's also these inserts after every chapter. There are kind of these documents in a found footage style, which I briefly mentioned earlier in the review. And at the very end of each one of these is a Morse code entry. And as I mentioned with House of Leaves, the footnotes and the puzzles were just layered within the narrative itself. They felt like part of the document. They didn't feel like an addition that existed outside of the narrative. The ones in this book do. Granted, they link to the story, but they feel separate from the story you're reading. So while I can appreciate the author's attempt at trying to channel some of the House of Leaves genius, he clearly didn't get it, which is why I'm going to give We Used to Live Here by Marcus Kliewer a 5 out of 10. An unscary puzzle box lacking a soul, with a plot that is better suited for a video game and doesn't give the horror enough time to breathe, and writing that is serviceable at best, if not try hard at times. I know you guys voted for me to read this. I know you guys out there probably wanted me to like it or were excited about how I felt about it. And unfortunately, this book is a bit of a stinker in my opinion. It's a very forgettable direct-to-Netflix movie, and ironically enough, the movie rights have been sold, starring Blake Lively, and I believe they're going to Netflix. So there you have it. I guess it's finding its appropriate home. But let me know, did you read We Used to Live Here by Marcus Kliewer? Do you agree with me? Do you disagree with me? Do you think boys can enjoy this book too? Or is it strictly for the ladies? But I hope you enjoyed the review. Thanks for hanging out with me. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.